Hi everyone, this is Heather Lottinen from the Flourish Academy. This is episode 520. Today we're talking about the major updates that Adobe released last week for both Photoshop and Lightroom. Now let's start with Lightroom. We are currently up to version 9.0 for Lightroom Classic. Now if you're new to Lightroom or you've only been with it for a short while, then what happens with these major updates, and how do I know that these updates are major? Because of how they named them. So we were on version 8.4, we're now on 9. So that tells me this is a major update, which means the next time you open Lightroom, it will ask you if you'd like to upgrade your catalog. Now, people over the interwebs are freaking out about this if they're new to Lightroom. If they haven't been with it for a while, then they've never seen this dialog box. It simply says, do you want to upgrade your catalog so that it's compatible with the latest version? You can simply answer yes, it's perfectly safe. All of your photos and all of your work will be there and it won't look any differently. So that's the good news, not a big deal. I looked through the enhancements to Lightroom on this version and there wasn't anything that stood out to me as being really important for my workflow. I'm going to post the link to these articles below, but for instance, it says fill uneven edges on your panorama, multi-batch export, develop presets and preset groups, filter color label folders and collections. So of course also support for new cameras and other enhancements. So Lightroom feels pretty stable to me. But now Photoshop on the other hand, let me rephrase. Photoshop is stable as well, but not with Mac OS Catalina. So if you are on a Mac computer, I would recommend that you not update to Catalina yet because there are known compatibility issues with Photoshop. Now they were there in the previous version of Photoshop as well, because Catalina was released when Photoshop was still version 20 and we're now at version 21. In fact, just as I was starting this video, I was looking at my Adobe Creative Cloud Manager on my iMac and I noticed that there was an update for Photoshop, which means it's now at 21.0.1, which tells me that's a super minor update and it's usually to fix bug issues. However, I was scouring the Adobe website and I'm still seeing that there are issues with Catalina. And as much as I love you guys, I am not willing to test this on my working machine. However, I have been thinking that I might possibly update it on my MacBook Pro just to see how it works. So I use my MacBook Pro for travel and when I'm teaching. And I was looking at my schedule to see when my next in-person class was with Photoshop or Lightroom just to see if I have enough time to work out any issues. And I think I do. I'm not quite ready to pull the trigger yet. Now these issues, depending on how you use Photoshop, could be just a minor inconvenience or they could be a big deal. You would have to read through those to see. But in any case, when Mac releases a new operating system, especially a big jump, I always wait at least several weeks, maybe even a couple of months, because there will be bugs and then there will be updates. And I just don't think it's a good time of year for photographers to experiment with Lightroom and Photoshop. Am I right? You probably have a ton of sessions to edit and you don't need these applications failing on you at this point. Okay, but I do want to talk about the Photoshop release because this was a major update and there were a lot of new things that I've started to explore that I think will be useful for us. As always, there are a lot of updates that just aren't important to me. For instance, improvements to presets, swatches, gradients, patterns, shapes, and styles. I really don't use those that much, so that does not matter to me. But this next one does. It's called the new object selection tool. So the old adage in Photoshop is to select before you correct because it will make your corrections easier. So I use a variety of selection tools depending on what I'm targeting. I use the polygonal lasso tool, I use the magnetic lasso tool, of course the marquee tool, the quick select tool. Any of those tools work really well, but this new object selection tool seems to be pretty impressive. It uses the Adobe Sensei technology, and I tried it on a photo of a dog on a leash with a background that was really difficult to separate between the dog and the background, meaning there were similar color tonalities. I used this tool and it nailed it. It was actually really impressive. So as I use this more, I will obviously do some Photoshop screencasts to show you how I'm using it. But if you create selections in Photoshop, this can be really powerful because I was actually very surprised at its performance. Another thing they changed, which makes me like, really? Okay. They changed the transform behavior so that it would be more consistent. If you have been with Photoshop for a while, then you know of this debacle. So for approximately, I don't know, 100 years, the way the free transform tool worked was if you wanted to constrain it to the original ratio, you would hold down the shift key and click and drag. That's the way it was forever and ever. And then in version 19, I believe, they changed that behavior and they made it the exact opposite. So you no longer had to hold down shift, you could just click and drag and it would maintain those proportions. And if you wanted to not maintain those proportions, then you had to hold down shift. They exactly reversed the behavior, which was absolutely maddening to me because I use that all the time. I use the free transform tool quite a bit and I was so accustomed. I mean, muscle memory at its finest, holding down shift, clicking and dragging drove me crazy. Apparently, it drove a lot of people crazy because there was an uprising in the Adobe community, and it says here, Adobe listened. They changed the default transform behavior is now proportional scaling with the ability to maintain the aspect ratio via the link icon so you can turn that on or off. So in the tool options bar, when you select a tool that uses this, because there are a couple that do it, your tool options bar will have this new link and it's just a little icon. You can click it in order to change the behavior of that tool. But you know what? This makes it really interesting as an instructor, especially online, because I'll say, hold down shift to maintain those proportions. You know, all the past 500 videos say that. And then for a year, I had to change what I was saying. Well, the behavior is reversed, so now you do it this way. And now I could go back to the old way. Oh, help me, Rhonda. Let's just leave it alone. That was okay. I'm happy that there's now an easy way to select to go back and forth between which behavior you like. Because if you were new to Photoshop, then maybe you never got used to holding the shift key. But I wasn't. I think that they should have released this when they originally reversed the behavior. I think that would have been the smart thing to do. I, however, am not an Adobe engineer, nor do they listen to me. So I didn't have any say in that. I'm glad they added that. I wish they would have done it sooner. Okay. The rest of the updates are like the improved properties panel, conversion between smart objects and layers back and forth. So if you use smart objects and you group them together as if you take your layers, and you group them together as a smart object, you can easily go back and forth between those two if you do that. There's been some enhancements made to the Transform Warp tool. Now, if you're in the Flourish Academy membership, I have a video where I used this tool to transform hair, the bangs on one of my brides, to cover her eye because it was not in focus. I had photographed this beautiful bride with my 50-1.2 when I was shot with Canon, and I focused, it doesn't matter which eye, let's say it was the right eye. I focused on her right eye and her head was turned, so her left eye was out of focus and I didn't like it. But she had swooshy bangs, you know, they would like swoop over. So what I did was I used the warp tool in order to pull her bangs over the eye that was out of focus so you couldn't tell. And I love that video. It's actually really fun. But let me tell you something, it takes some practice to get a handle on, literally a handle because it has handles, on the Transform Warp tool. They've enhanced it. They've made it a little better, which means if you're new to it, that means, let me give you Adobe speak. Let me translate. That means confusing. It's just going to take some time to play around with it. But anyway, if you're in the membership, check out that video. I'll post it in the members group, which one I'm referring to. But it is a pretty powerful tool. Okay, there have been some enhancements to fonts, which I use a little bit, but I don't do a ton of design work in Photoshop. Okay, this one is important, though I haven't tested it yet. They've enhanced the content-aware fill, and I do use that. So they have 3 new sampling options: auto, rectangular, and custom, and this dictates how Photoshop looks at the pixels surrounding the area in order to fill something in. So I'll have to play around with that. There's been some adjustments for brightness, contrast, curves. There's a new screen in the app, an open screen. I hate it. I turned that off immediately. A couple of new shortcuts. Some dialogue performance, improved lens blur performance, smart object comp tracking, fine, that's fine, whatever. Preference setting to auto show or hide the home screen. Yes, uncheck, I don't like that. Okay, then, Adobe always releases these. With every update, if you go to the website, you'll see this when you update it. Will say, what's new in Photoshop? You click it and they'll give you all of these features. And every time, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see this, fixed customer reported issues and known issues. So you can click those links, which I do because I'm so curious. I don't think ever in my life with Adobe, which has been over 16 years, I have ever seen this many issues on this page. And this is, it scrolls, there's more. Those are the known fixed issues with the version 21 release. That's crazy. That is a lot. Okay, but I browsed through them, and some things I recognize and other things, as I've mentioned, I don't use, so it wasn't important to me. But then I clicked the next link, which is Photoshop and Mac OS Catalina. And these issues, this article was released pretty quickly after Catalina was released, and it hasn't changed. And I've looked for updates, and apparently there are still these issues. Some of these issues, again, are not a big deal if, for instance, you don't use plugins. If you don't use plugins, then the fact that plugins can't be found or verified is not an issue to you. It is to me because I use plugins. Lens profile creator doesn't run. Camera raw issues. Cannot brush on gradient adjustment. Extend script toolkit doesn't run. Okay, that's a little concerning to me because I use scripts, but if you don't, then it might not be a problem. Adobe is not saying that Photoshop CC version 21.0.1 is completely compatible with Mac OS Catalina. So people are asking me every day, can we update to Catalina yet? And I'm just saying no, you can't. Oh, listen, hey, you're the boss of you. You can do what you want. You can update to Catalina, but there could be issues. If you have finished your season and you're all set and you have some downtime coming up and you want to install Catalina on your Mac and play with Photoshop, by all means. As I said earlier, I might do that with my laptop. I'm thinking about installing Catalina and testing Photoshop here to see if it impacts my workflow. For some people, these issues between Catalina and Photoshop do not matter. They've updated and they're fine. But, whoa, this one screams at me. Droplets don't work. Droplets launch but don't work, period. That's literally all the section says. I use droplets every single day. Droplets are like actions on steroids. They are automated actions. So I take my actions, I create a droplet, and then I take an entire folder of images and put it on that droplet, and then it's done. Those are incredibly important. They are an integral part of my workflow. I can't have Photoshop not work with droplets, so I cannot install Mac OS Catalina. That is the bottom line. Okay, Lightroom seems to be working just fine. Again, you can upgrade your catalog without any problem. However, please make sure you go to your preferences and uncheck the performance with the GPU processor because you could face issues with that. Again, this is not relative to everyone. I don't know what type of computer you have. I don't know what your processor or your video card looks like, but I do know that for most people, unchecking that box helps Lightroom to work better and faster. I have several videos on our YouTube channel on how to improve the performance of Lightroom. But I have noticed since this update that a lot of you are complaining that Lightroom is really slow. But what we need to troubleshoot is this. Is Lightroom slow because your hard drive is full, or there's some sort of workflow practice we need to look at? Or is Lightroom slow because of a computer issue or this graphics CPU card? I should look that up. I should look up exactly what is happening with that improved performance because I have newer machines and it's still not working. And I don't know the details though, but I just know that I uncheck that and it performs better. So if you have any questions, let me know. I hope that you found this useful and informative, and I'll see you in the next video.